my first question is just how do we govern ourselves before contact, and like what was our relationship with other tribes when we're out east?
How did we govern ourselves?
All I ever heard was that the women made the decisions. Whatever
Yeah.
they were gonna do, the women made the decision.
Yeah, so a long time ago, our government system was, well, because Mohicans, there was 11 groups of us originally. And some of those groups, you know, in modern times are classified as being their own tribe or different tribes. But they were really bands of Mohicans, or part of the, well, you could say the Mohicans were a confederacy of different bands, like the Wappinger. So, you know, in history, you'll see them being classified as a different tribe, but really they weren't. Traditionally, they were a band of us. The Manhattan were also a band of us. So they're located on Manhattan Island, New York, and that's where they get the name Manhattan from. So each group had a head man, and then at the top of the Confederacy was the head man to the Confederacy. So all those other groups had sub-chiefs. The villages had sub-chiefs. And the women would put the men into their positions of leadership. And the way that worked were that each village, the different villages, they were primarily dominated by clans, a certain clan. So let's say one clan was predominantly Bear Clan. And so the women held the property of the tribe. So the longhouses, those were the women's houses, and the families. So the women controlled the longhouses. And back in the day, if you owned any property, a different kind of sense, you know, than the Western concept of owning property, but it would come through your mother's side. So each house had a head woman, and each house would cast a vote, or nominate, I should say nominate, they would nominate a male leader. And then the houses collectively then would come together and determine which men have been nominated. And then they would vote again. The head woman for each house would bring forth the nomination from their house. And then that's how they would determine by vote who would be the head man for that village or that community. So
What years are you talking?
So this is pre-contact. Traditionally this is how our government system operated. I don't really know what you would call him. Grand Chief, maybe, might be
Did they use the term sachem?
or Sachem, yeah. Would be like the head of the whole Confederacy.
Have you ever heard that we're actually part of the what tribe do I want to say?
Probably Lenape.
The Lenape.
Yeah.
We're part of the Lenape.
Mm-hmm.
In Delaware.
Yeah.
And that's the whole East Coast, like?
Mm-hmm.
Because I read history daily. I'm reading one right now that's from the beginning, it's written by a probably,
How many years ago do you think that was? Because by the time there was contact, we were no longer part of the Lenape, I don't think, do you? We
Well-
called him grandfather.
yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Well, it probably depends on which part of the,
I think we've always held that relation, or we held that relationship at least for, to the 1800s, I would say, at least some degree of it.
I think it had to do with the way we moved about too, because we all moved to the East Coast as, you know, probably a large group, and then as people moved away and got their areas and become a little different, languages changed a little bit, and their group kind of formed itself, and then relationships would kind of become different. You know? So I think over time that would have changed.
Yeah.
So by the time contact, you know, people were spread all the way back across, you know, because, you know, you had to go through Ice Age and all that stuff. So through a lot of, you know, thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of years. I don't know what time, how long ago it was that we came to the East Coast, but you know, it could be 100,000 years ago when we got to the East Coast, and we were, you know, kind of figuring things out again because we came from a great civilization where everybody disbanded in different directions. So then they had to recreate their governments, and then over time. So at one time, the Lenape and us were the same people, you know. Well, we're pretty much still the same people. It's just we're so connected to the land. The land pretty much governs how we do things. So as people move to a different section, then everything kind of changes a little bit. It affects the language and everything else. So
Yeah.
I think by the time contact, we were spread back out across North America. So
and some lady at some point speaking to, you know, in some, I don't know what you would say, I think with the missionaries, said we came from the west by north when we moved east. Because now I got us clear back down in the Mayans, they're discovering that new stuff down there. I got us coming up
yeah,
in the cross.
and that's what I think too. I think we came from. I think the Andes is where the great civilization was, and I think that's where the flood and famine was, and then that's when we separated in different directions. Because even the Ho-Chunks have the same story. Not all of them know it, but I talked to one elder who knew their history because he grew up with his grandparents. And
so there is some oral history on us going to the Northwest.
No, coming from the northwest.
Well, this, we go there and come back is the story I was told, so.
Okay.
And this was probably after we came from the great civilization, had found our way to present day New York. But at some point, our leaders, as far as I know, it's not written, decided for whatever reason they were going to travel northwest. So our leaders had decided, all right, we're going to leave our traditional homeland as we know it today in New York area. We're going to leave there and we're going to travel northwest until we can't no more. So we go until we hit that giant mountain range that was like a wall. And we run into this other group of people. And we could convince them to join us. So they do. So they travel with us. And we keep traveling northwest until the land ends. and the water begins. So we see the land way off in the distance. We see this little strip, little dark spot. And the leaders for both groups decide, all right, we're going to build boats, and we're going to travel across the water and see what's on that land over there. So they did that, and they traveled over. And so they started making trying to get settled in over there. But there was a group of people, they said, that were there, that lived there. And they said they rode on animals, the backs of animals. And they went to war with us because they were trying to push us out of there, and they were beating us up pretty good. So we decided, all right, well, we're going to go back. We had named that place the stony place or the rocky place. And we called the people on horses, we called them snake men. But so we had gathered back again, built our boats, and headed back across the water. But they said there was groups of people, not everybody came back. There was groups of people that stayed.
Probably fell in love.
Yeah, probably. It's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
And they traveled back, and they crossed over that mountain range again, and that group of people that they met there on their journey stayed there again. They said, all right, this is our land, this is where we're from, we're staying here.
It's an interesting story.
And then, as we're coming down, we split into two groups. And one goes across the top of the Great Lakes to go back to New York area. And one comes south, down through Montana, cuts across, comes underneath. And they said on the way there, on the way back, people would find places that they fell in love with. And as we traveled back to our homeland, there kept being little settlements, because people would fall in love with a place, and they were like, all right, well, this is as far as we're going to go, and we're going to stay here. And on the southern part, the group that went south, underneath the Great Lakes and across, so they had talked about running into, they came to the Great River, Mississippi River. And they said when they crossed it, they ran into this civilization, this group of people that built giant buildings, giant structures, and that they're witches. They did everything backwards, and that they were doing, that they did bad stuff. And by that time, the group that cut across the top was already back in the New York area. So they leave that place along the Mississippi, and they go up back to the homeland, and they start telling people about this this society, or this group of people who are all witches. And they decided they were going to try to wipe them out, because they said they were bad and they did everything backwards. And so they had gathered as many warriors as they could, and they said they even had warriors from other tribes join them. And then they went back to that place along the Mississippi, and they went to war with that group of people. And they said they almost completely wiped them out, but there was little groups of people that survived from that society. And they scattered, but they were no longer a force. Like, they were no longer large like they were. And then we headed back, our warriors headed back. But if you look, historically at this story, so we go up, on our journey northwest, in the beginning, and we run into that mountain. That's a wall. It's a Yukon mountain range. And all those people there, even today, they're the Dene, or Denny. They're Athabascan speaking people. And if you look at a map, even today you can find settlements on the coast of Siberia who speak a dialect of Athabascan. So I think those are some of those people that decided, oh, we're not leaving, we're going to stay here.
Yeah.
Then you look, you know, that group that came to the south. You know, how did the Blackfoot get there, way out west? Their dialect is an L and M dialect like ours. So
Well, what I understood is that our people came from out that way. And when we get to the Hudson and it's going back and forth, that puts them on the east coast. The, what's the name river is the same way.
St. Lawrence,
No,
Housatonic.
on the west coast,
Oh, the Mississippi are you talking about?
on the coast.
On the coast, I don't know.
The ocean.
What's that river that comes in
Hudson.
Klamath River?
I don't know.
You're in state of Washington.
Yeah, Klamath River, I believe. Is the big river.
It's a big river, and it's back and forth. Brings in the salmon and stuff like that. So that's my story. Yes, but then I heard a story that our people came from the south. So that's why I got us down on the end of where they just found that new settlement.
Well, it fits with the story that Travis told. Some went south. And also, if they had originally been on the Muh-he-con-ne-ok and then went northwest and then came back, and then they said, this is our nativity. So that, it all fits too.
So I
Yeah,
have,
but he went on to talk about what, was that your family he talked about? That were crazy?
My family isn't that the same as your family?
No, I'm not part of your family.
and you know who I think they ran into were
I was raised being told that.
the mound builders at Cahokia.
Yeah.
Because if you cross the Mississippi, there's Cahokia right there.
Mm-hmm.
And they built large earth mounds and they did do a lot of weird stuff. You know, like amputated their hands, grew their nails out, split their tongues.
Oh, that's what you're talking about, the witches. Oh.
So I think that's what, you know, they see that and they're like, oh, these guys are scary. They do all this weird stuff.
But our origin story that you're talking about would have been way before this story.
Yeah, so coming from the south would have happened first, and we went to northeast and then up to Siberia and back again.
Or right back where we first started.
Well, I haven't been that far back yet.
Yeah.
That's oral history, though.
You know,
The
and
written stuff won't go that far back.
No.
oh, it can't. But I mean, to me, what I had heard, you know,
Yeah.
it's just like talking about the UFO business. And they said, oh, there's people out there. And I said, go look in the caves in the South America and look in there. Look at the drawings on there. What are they? Now that's on the news the other day.
Well, who knows how advanced our civilization was at one time when we were a great civilization. You know, in order to get to that point where we became a civilization, how great and how advanced and technologically advanced we would have been. But like I said, I think we advanced past that because we realized
It's not
that,
sustainable.
yeah, it's not. I mean,
Even the term civilization, you know,
yeah.
makes it sound like that's the best place to be, the best way to be, and maybe not necessarily.
There's another story that's related to that, to going northwest and
Oh
back.
yeah, that's another story down from the Southwest.
But
The Star People, they call them.
there's a story I was told that a group of our warriors in 1502 or 1503 had left the Northeast because they realized what was Europeans were, you know, making their way, and they'd already been in, you know, the southern parts of the country. But so they had left and went west. And they had traveled, they said, as far as where the Crow live, the Crow people. Then they quit hearing back whatever happened to them, and they never came back.
What you doing?
And that was all I was told about that story and that's all I knew about it for years.
They
And
left their families and went out west?
And then
And you called them warriors?
and then so this was maybe 20 years ago now. I went to this gathering in Lac de Flambeau, and they had all these tribal people from everywhere. Canada, United States, South America, Central America. And I had met this old Yakima guy. So I got there, it was pretty late at night, and I just walked around the camp trying to find somebody that I knew. And I run into these two guys I used to sing with at Powell's. And they're like, oh, hey, Trev, come over here, come sit with us. They're sitting around this campfire. And this old man gets up, shakes my hand. He's like, oh, my name's Sydney, I'm from Yakima Nation. Like, this is my camp. He's like, sit down, we're just sharing, we're just sharing stories from our different tribes. He's like, I was just getting ready to tell one. Oh, cool, so we sit down. This Yakima elder starts telling this story. And he said, in 1502 or 1503, it was like a group of 9 Eastern Algonquin warriors came to the Yakima looking for the Denny from Canada. He's like, but they ended up not going any farther. They stayed with the Yakima. But, he started the story off by saying, he's like, us as Yakima were changed more early on by another native people than we were by whites. And that's where he starts with the 1502 or 1503. And he said, so that group of 9 Eastern Algonquin warriors, he said, we don't know what tribe they were from, but we know that they're Eastern Algonquin because of the way that they dressed. He said they taught them how to build their homes different. He said before that they had earth lodges, similar to the Madatsa and Anarumra. They built their homes half in the ground. He's like, they taught us how to build our homes different, and we started building homes on top of the ground. He's like, they taught us how to make our bows so that they shot faster. He's like, but the biggest thing they did was they changed our, he said religion, he used the word religion, changed our religion. He brought us the big house. And when he said that, the hairs on the back of my neck, that's the first time I've ever really felt that. Was then. I stood up. And I just wanted to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt him, so I just let him keep going. And so he said that group of warriors brought that big house to the Yakima, and to this day they do it the way that they were taught. And he said they stayed, those group of 9 stayed with the Yakima for 3 generations. And by the time they left, there was over 300 descendants of them 9 warriors. And by then, the Yakimas had acquired horses. So they had given them horses as a gift. And they took those 300 people and left and went south, and he said they'd never know what happened to them. And if you look, and this is just a theory, so this isn't, this other part is a theory of mine, but if you look at some of there's Algonquin speaking people in Northern California who also have the big house.
Oh, yeah.
So I wonder if, those are the descendants of those warriors that came from.
Makes sense.
But, I think we were looking for the Denny because we had that relationship with them when we traveled to Siberia and came back. And they were like, oh, we have this old relationship with the Denny, so we're going to go find them again. And
I've never, ever heard that story.
yeah,
I'm coming on,
this is probably not written down anywhere.
I'm reading by Darcy McNichols, you know him? I'm reading something that he's written. Well, he's been here. He's my dad and them, they all knew him. Like, I couldn't swear to that.
I really don't know for sure. But he started from the beginning of time. And he's just now got to where it's interesting to me because now I know what he's talking about. But
Well, when you think about John Quinney's story in his speech, where he says, "We came from," how does he put it? "We came from the west," or does he like to say the northwest? His famous speech. So I think when we first started learning about our history, that's what we were going by. The fact, well, what John Quinney said, and I think that Oppomet also repeated it.
Mhm.
So that's why we thought that we came somewhere from the west. But I think I've heard Joe say he thinks it might have even been, rather than over the western United States, it might have been Canada.
Well,
Well,
I know the Menominee said when they described their story that I heard that man say it was the Northwest, but I've heard on too many occasions it was the West and that it was Southern. And I don't know for sure if the Ice Age had already started or not. So if the Ice Age was, if it was before the Ice Age, then maybe it was the Northwest. But if it was the Ice Age, you know, if there was already tons and tons of ice up there, then you would have to think it'd be the, you know, Southwest. And judging by other histories and knowing great civilizations existed, and hearing South American history and Central American history, and really even European history dates it back to the Andes. And they say a lot of history says that the origin of civilization in the Americas was the Andes.
They do have the archaeological site, which is the oldest, I would say, advanced civilization on Earth comes from the Andes, so makes sense that that could be the starting place.
it's just interesting to me. They keep finding stuff older and older and older. You know,
Well, they have so many archaeological
thousands
finds.
of years, not just, you know.
Hundreds now. It's into the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah, they found mammoth bones in California dating back to about 110,000 years. They have cut marks, knife marks on it. So they were killing mammoths in
Yeah,
California
that was
100,000
something
years
else
ago.
I just heard.
So that
When they
shows
got to
how
see,
far
they
down
checked the
cold
wood.
was.
They
Yeah.
checked the wood ledges to see how it was worked. You know, interesting. The north by west is
So
what
anyway.
what I heard.
Anyway, this just shows that we're, for want of a better word, conglomeration of different peoples that existed.
And that shows the importance of the land too and how it changes us. I mean, if you get back to the core of it, like the similarities, even if you go to South America, how they believe and how they are is so similar to us, and their connection to the land. So that shows as we moved and the land changed us, you know, and how, or even our everyday lifestyles of what we ate and how we planted and all that stuff. And then if you go further into like how they said, you know, they knew we had these vast trade systems, and then they say that corn was traded to where it come up north, and then we adapted the corn to that growing season. What if we brought the corn as we moved, and the corn changed over time as we planted it each year in different areas as we moved, which would make more sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially since the soil would be different every place. Yeah.
Just like the mountains, we think the mountains are South American. There's mountains in South America, in the East Coast.
There's mounds in Ohio, there's mounds down some state down south.
Oh, I was to a mound in Iowa, right along the Mississippi River on the side.
Yeah.
There's mounds in Wisconsin. There's mounds around where I live, and the Ho-Chunks did mounds and burial mounds, and
As far as Manitoba,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
there's some
And-
mounds there.
And then
So where did they start?
I imagine those were part of us, and as we moved, we kept doing it. The same as the civilizations like Cahokia, and there was some big civilizations in Florida, so that would be a part of what we knew from back then that we brought with, I think one of the big things too we learned was that those great civilizations weren't meant to last, and that's where we got the subsistence lifestyle from, and smaller groups, because when you get a large group, you use up everything around you, and that was one of our big teachings, and knowing that you shouldn't do that, because even if you get into like Bible stories and how they talked about the flood, and how that was like a form of punishment. Maybe it was. Maybe God said your civilization is too big and you're using up all your resources and not taking care of Nielangomati or all our relations. That connection there.
And a lot of people have that same flood story.
Yeah, they say all people throughout the world have that if they trace back their oral histories, have a flood story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why that's one of the things that changed us into being semi-nomadic tribal people instead of great civilizations. Like if you look at Cahokia, there's a lot of mystery there, but apparently it didn't work. People had to abandon that too.
Yeah, interesting. So when the colonizers, invaders, whatever you want to call them, came here and found the way our people were living at that time, they called us primitive, right?
No, they called us savages.
That too,
But yeah, like we were more advanced because we advanced past that point. And then, throughout time, getting lessons from things like that and the spirits teaching us how to be again, because each people were given those original instructions, and at a time when we had the great civilization, I imagine we forgot those original instructions and we had to be reminded. And then, different spirits that were sent to stay with us and be with us and teach us how to be again. So yeah, I think we were more advanced because we advanced past that. Even when you look at today, these great civilizations like New York and LA, it's actually, if you truly look at it from a spiritual sense, it's going backwards in my mind, because look at what we're doing to Mother Earth, and not respecting all our relations, and most people don't even understand the meaning of all our relations, how we're related to everything. Our place on the earth is supposed to be taking care of everything around us as they take care of us,
Look at the cities. They don't even know what the earth is. They never see it.
Yeah.
That's really something, I think. There was a Alaskan lady on the news the other day. I don't know what, and she said that was how she was raised. The earth, you got to respect the earth. You live. It's because that's why you are, because of the earth. I thought that was really interesting to hear a young person say that. It just,
So then, was it before, like contact or before the plagues, where like at one time we could have like 1,000 warriors or something ready for war or something? Or
3,000.
3,000?
At a moment's notice, they said. So that's 3,000 men, warriors in the area.
Mhm.
Yeah, that I don't know how far back that goes because that's oral history.
Mhm.
So yeah, that would have been pre-contact.
Do you know what other tribes were around us when we were out east yet? Besides like Mohawks,
Oneida.
Oneida?
But they're over here, and we're still between here and the coast.
The
There's
Wampanoag.
there's a lot of names now, but who are they really? Are they
Yeah.
Mohicans or are they, what?
So
That's
yeah,
it,
because
yeah.
We don't know that.
A lot of those tribes were the tribal people, like your Uncle Travis was saying earlier, and they were just called things like that, like Wampanoag or that Wamp. I can't remember how to break it down, but it really means the people where the sun comes up. So they're very, very East Coast.
Yeah, right.
So Mohican comes from really like the head of where the Hudson flows into the ocean, and the ocean comes in and the tides move back and forth, and that water's never still. So that's where that name comes from. So all those tribes were named by, they were like almost like place names, like or what they're known for, or those people do this or those people do that. So yeah, how our relationship, it was all about, I think it was more about relations, how we're related to them and how we see them, and because of the way, the nature of the language, how it was described everything.
And too, the Algonquin were part of a large confederacy.
Right.
Then there was divisions of that confederacy. So the Algonquin Confederacy as a whole spread all the way to Minnesota.
Yeah.
Or further.
Yeah, or further.
They speak Algonquin.
In Montana.
Yeah, they do.
The Blackfeet.
Yeah.
The Blackfeet, yeah.
And that speaks on how people move too.
Yeah.
Did they move to Canada first? The
Um,
ones up the Blackfeet moved to Canada first, and then they somehow came back. Well, there was no border back then.
yeah.
I think part of the whole thing is we're just reading, and did an Indian write it? If the Indians didn't write it, then is it really exactly how we would think it should be?
Yeah.
Yeah, when that, thinking about the large confederacy of Algonquins, everybody had a duty. People had duties, within that confederacy. And they said ours, Mohicans, we were known for being good warriors. So, as the eastern group of that confederacy, we were, anytime anyone from our confederacy went to war, we were supposed to join them. That was part of our duty, our responsibility. But we'd also get called on by other groups, outside of the east, like in the south, the southern Algonquin branch of that confederacy had called on us at one point to fight.
And I read somewhere that many times it was our tribe who were called upon to be the peacemaker.
Yeah, that too.
That would go along with that power we had because, if we were called in, and knowing that we were warriors and that we were a very large tribe, that we'd have a little more power. So then we were able to, because people really didn't want to go to war. There were times when war got really bad, but there were times where people were very peaceful and didn't want to go to war. So that threat of war, people would want to be more peaceful or avoid it and not lose their relatives. So
Yeah, and to go back previously in the conversation about the women and their leadership, the women were the only ones that could call us into war.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because they were the ones who took care of our young ones and held our tribe together. So they were the only ones that could call us into war. You know, the sachem, the grand chief, he didn't have that authority to do. And once the women would call us into war, the sachem had his war chief, who was his right-hand man. And once the women called us into war, then the war chief then became the leader for that period of time. And only the women could call us out of war. So I think that really goes to show how much our women, you know, were our decision makers, and really I think just the essence of our
It
existence.
should have lasted through more than siding too.
yeah, even the Cherokee at one time, we did I don't know if we fought on their side or if we were in that diplomatic sense, but they at one time they held land for us. They said if we ever needed land that we could move by them, because out of like repayment for what we did for them.
Yeah. So we got called into war, or called upon by the Miami at one point, and they had moved from Wisconsin. And the way I was told was that that group of Miami, they had moved down to just south of Chicago, where present day Chicago is, but they had broke off from the Menominees, so they were related to the Menominees, and they had moved south, but had gotten into a war with the Luniak, they were Algonquin speaking, and their language was really close to ours, but they were considered this rogue tribe because they didn't want to be part of the Confederacy, the Algonquin Confederacy, although they were Algonquin people. So they had gone to war with the Miami, and the Miami had sent runners to us in the northeast. So we had come down and helped them, and we pushed the Luniak farther south. And the Miami had told us then, if anything ever happens to your land, you always have a place with us because you came and helped us out.
Oh, that's where that came from.
So I wonder if that has, I don't know this for sure, but it makes you think about our migration to White River, Indiana with the Miami.
Right,
And
right. I was just thinking the same thing.
That makes sense.
First it was Ohio, somewhere in Ohio. From there we got to Miami.
Have you ever heard any stories about why the Oneida welcomed us to live with them?
I don't really, no,
Yes.
not necessarily, but
Since we moved to Wisconsin.
I just
Revolutionary War, they,
Yeah,
you know, they broke the Iroquois Confederacy
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
by not fighting on the side of the rest,
right.
Yeah,
you know, and they joined us. So during,
centenarians.
yeah, that may be where it comes from, because they joined us, you know, and we joined sides with the colonists, where the rest of the Iroquois
Yeah,
were on the side of the British. So,
that must have been it.
and then shortly after that, we had a reservation together. So maybe that was the start of that relationship.
yeah,
And that's
I
where
know that.
Tigerton come from. After they moved here, they didn't have no work. They came up to Tigerton and worked with a mill, helped cut down our coal. Why we didn't have no logs when we moved up here?
Yeah,
My mother-in-law said she was born down where the electric company, The fire department is down there
Oh, really?
on A. And that's why she was born there, because the Oneidas had moved up here with us, so they were, you know, connected from where, how long, who knows what.
I don't know. I don't know why, but I know that they had held land for us for a long time. Oneida, similar to those other things we were talking about, that they held land for us. So then, after the Revolutionary War, the tribes that fought against the colonists, there was still fear from them, so they got treated better than the ones who fought with them. There was no fear because we fought on their side, so they weren't afraid of us, and that we were the ones that got pushed out. So then we took advantage of that Oneida's holding that land for us.
But I also heard another story, and I can never find that again, but I know I read it more than once, that the Oneida men thought the Stockbridge women were more beautiful. Did you ever see that one? I wish I could find that again. I think they're the one that showed it to me, and I thought it was funny.
Makes me think about our alliance with the Odawa. I said a long time ago we used to have a close relationship with them, but we would always send our young women out to the Odawa to marry in, and then they would send some of their young men to us, and then they would build that relationship even more, because then there was family blood ties between the two groups.
And they would do that with the leaders. The leaders would do that so that their families be intertwined and keep that relationship. And you would think, when you thought about them, you'd be closer to them because you have relatives that are a part of that. So the leaders and their thought processes would be less quick to go to war, less quick to, you would think more kindly of them, all that type of thing.
And you would also avoid the inbreeding and the dilution of strong genes.
When first contact started, how did our ways of life change, or how do we adapt to that change?
Well, one of the big things was it changed our economy completely, because our economy was that relationship with the earth and not taking too much, and they took advantage of the beaver trade, which was a huge one for us, because that only heightened our bad relationships with the Mohawks, which was pretty much our enemy, and we were in the same area, so we began fighting over lands for beavers, trapping the beaver, and then we started over trapping the beaver, and through the beaver trade we become reliant on European goods, so we kind of started forgetting our traditional ways of how everyday life was. We started relying on those pots and pans and not making wooden stuff, not making the same meals because we had pots and pans now, and we got reliant on that. And at that time, bows and arrows was better than guns, but guns was easier, because you didn't have to make the guns, you could just trade for them. So we slowly become reliant on guns too.
Only if the beaver were still there and you could have the money to trade.
Yeah.
That's what turned into be the big issue.
Yeah, and on top of that too, because the power was with the natives. The natives had all the power in the world, and they were just visitors, and we said what was what. So then they started doing the divide and conquer thing, where they started pitting us against each other.
Yep.
And that's when we started really warring with the Mohawks, So we lost a lot of people, a lot of warriors to that. And then not to mention the disease.
Yeah, by the time Henry Hudson came down the Hudson River, we were already fighting with the Mohawks. And they had to come down. Henry Hudson came down the Hudson River and really instigated the war. And it became known as the Beaver Wars. That lasted about 80 years. But really, the wars were going on far before Henry Hudson came down. And he just made it worse. So
There's the French and there's English. Who's the other one? There's three of them that
the
are.
Dutch,
But
Henry Hudson
you
was
never
Dutch.
hear them talk about the Dutch very often until Henry Hudson shows up. But the French, we don't realize how close the East Coast is to, it's Canada. And that's a lot of the issues that I'm reading about now is, it's the Canada, you know. Who knows? And we don't know all the little tribes, like the Wampanoags and all of those that are on the East Coast.
So yeah, so slowly that power situation changed and tipped. Because our numbers got smaller and we got, for us it was the Mohawks that we warred with, but they pit tribe against tribe, and separated us and started thinking at each other as separate and different,
And you also gotta remember that we were already getting hit with plagues at the time. So on top of, the wars that were happening, the interference from the Europeans, we were also at the same time being decimated by plague and by sickness. So you throw that on top of everything. And they said we held the Mohawk off for a long time. They couldn't beat us. Then when they finally did, it was after we had got hit real hard by smallpox or one of the other sicknesses going around. And that's when the Mohawk were able to move east of the Hudson. But before that, they weren't able to push us around or push us out of our territory. No, they didn't.
They got shoved back. When it became the 5 nations, it was, don't say 6, it was 5. Took a long time for that 6th one joined.
Have you ever heard who the leaders, any names of any leaders during those times?
So the name Metoxen,
Before that even, though.
but so when Henry Hudson came down the river, he had contact with the Mohawks first. And he had asked the Mohawks, who's on the other side of this river? There were villages that we passed. And the Mohawks told him, oh, that's Metoxen's village. So the name Metoxen goes back long, long time. It was one of those names that was passed down every so many generations was given. So that name has been with us at least 1609 when Hudson.
All the names that I ever seen, I could never pronounce them, so I have no idea what they are.
Yeah, well, Metoxen is just a
Well,
mispronunciation.
just like Chicks.
Metoxen.
Chicks is also an old name, and so is Quinny.
Yeah,
Those are some of the names that.
Quinnamunsett was the Quinny family came. That's where the name came
And
from.
Chicks was a leader at some point.
Yeah,
Whatever,
name
however
was so
it all
long, I
goes.
attempt to pronounce it.
Chicksuxum or something like that?
Something, yeah,
Yeah, do you think that
yeah.
changed to Chicks? Yeah.
Then there's a name, all this was in the 1700s, but one of the first treaties that they had entered into our speaker, his name was Apama.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So then after contact and after like the wars and the plagues, how did we end up having like our first move from the east, moving west?
So that would have been our first move. Would have been to Oneida,
Mm.
and it would have been a smaller group of us. It wouldn't have been the whole tribe,
Mm.
because the Stockbridge was become known as Stockbridge was that group that took on missionary, because our leaders seen that we needed to learn to read and write, because we were already signing papers and people were losing land that way because they were signing over things that they couldn't understand.
Mm.
So they recognized that they needed to learn to read and write, so they brought on a mission. And the way our people worked, it was actual freedom. So if a group got together and decided this is what they're gonna do, not everybody had to do it. It was, if you agreed with it, you could do it. If you didn't agree with it, you could go your own way. So not all of the people from the Mohicans didn't agree to it. There was a smaller group of us that did agree, and there was other people from other areas that we now call tribes that joined us there. And after the Revolutionary War, when they came back, white people, colonists, invaders, whatever, were moving in on our lands and actually living in warrior houses. Warriors that went to war on the colonist side come back, and white people were in their houses. So they quickly realized, all right, we gotta. They knew what was happening.
Talking about Stockbridge.
I tell it nicer.
Mm.
When they come back from the war, their houses were they lost it because they weren't here to pay their rent. So they left.
So yeah, then that was the first move to Oneida, New York. And then after the Revolutionary War, the king the King of England had a proclamation that there was a imaginary line drawn on the top of the Appalachian Mountains, that colonists weren't supposed to be able to go west of that, which, not all of them followed, but it was kind of held them back a little bit. And after colonists won, that proclamation was no longer in effect. So then they started moving, they started migrating west. And because of our location, we seen that, so we knew that we had to go west. And they didn't realize how quickly they would, and how many people would keep coming. So they went west, and I don't know how long they stayed in Oneida, but us in the group of Oneidas and Brotherton.
It's only one generation, wasn't it?
Something, yeah, it was a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But we realized we had to go further west, so then there was us, the Brothertons and the Oneidas, who they sent people to New York or to Wisconsin to pretty much kind of just check it out, and talk to the people in this area, the Menominees and the Ho-Chunks, and see about land here. And they made a agreement with them, or treaties with them, and there was some other people that stopped in Indiana and Ohio on the way, and there was trouble there because their land that was promised there, Muncie, Indiana, was one of the areas, was quickly taken away by the time they got back and decided, because the decisions weren't made rapidly, they were thought about, and could have took a year to decide.
They came to when they were moving though. They came to Ohio first, because you'll see where they moved, and there's even places out there and then they had arguments there. And that's when they showed down. But the Moravians church has got a lot to do with some of that.
Oh yeah, what is that massacre in Ohio?
Maiden hunting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big part of why we decided to finally, or to leave there, was because of that massacre.
Right, right.
And it wasn't everybody though. You know, everybody was a part of the tribe to move at once. It was groups.
Right, exactly. It went by groups.
So then, yeah, we finally ended up coming to Wisconsin.
Just to back up,
But it took
When
a
we-
long time to get to
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
to back up to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, when a group of our people moved there, it was because we agreed to have a missionary and learn how to be Christians. And that has a very big impact on our history. My, and I know a lot of people think this way too, is that if we hadn't agreed to that idea of becoming Christians, we might not have survived. So even though being a Christian today isn't necessarily the most agreeable thing we like to do these days, it did have a big impact on our people.
And that was an individual thing too. They knew that would be kind of a part of it. But when they moved there, you know, they would have discussed it and talked about all good things and bad things and weighed them and made a decision as a group, as the chiefs, and everybody would have had their say, who wanted to have a say. But when they actually moved there, it was more like a symbiotic relationship. Like they would kind of use each other. You know, it was that diplomatic mindset where, all right, we're gonna tell them these things too, but we're also gonna do these other things. You know, so when they were in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, a lot of them weren't actually buying into the Christianity. They were, so the mission house was below this hill. They had a hill, and at the same time they were going to church. Maybe the Saturday before church, they were up on the hill conducting ceremonies.
Yeah.
because
Tana, can I have some more water?
because we were still holding on to our ways, and at the same time, you know, you would say to the church, "Oh yeah, we're good Christians and we believe in your God is better than our God," and even today we know it's the same God. You know, we kind of tell them what they wanted to hear sometimes. You know. And a lot of the things that was written down about us were what we told them, and it's almost like feeding them what they wanted to hear sometimes.
And that's also why we're called Stockbridgians today. We lost. I still don't understand why our leaders at that time decided to go along with that nickname instead of retaining Muh-he-con. But I know one theory is that because there were other tribes that came to Stockbridge, it wasn't just Muh-he-cons. There were a lot of different tribes that came to join because they saw that we were having a better way of life under that missionary theme, and they wanted to get that education that our
It was
kids were-
education, yeah.
So it was a conglomeration again of Native people, and they were called the Stockbridges.
And
not
not all
just
the
Muh-he-cons.
not all the Mohicans went there either.
I know, yeah. So,
You know.
And with that too, the way the white man treated those Christian Indians was better than the way they treated what they would call savages. And like they said, not all the. I would imagine most of the Mohicans didn't go there
right.
because that would look at how small our group, our tribe is
Moravians,
now.
right?
Mhm.
So most of them wouldn't, and like Aunt Leah said earlier, if we didn't, you know, they thought we would disappear, and most of them have. You know, we're the last tribe of Mohicans.
Yep.
So our leaders were right in that sense for sure. And there was that sense because the mission moved with us to Wisconsin. We brought them with us. At the same time, we still practiced our ways too, you know, and we still spoke Mohican, but it did have this big effect because we had free will. Some of our people had become Christians only, and some of our people had only spoke English only over time, and then on top of that, you add in the boarding schools, which makes it worse because you can't speak Mohican anymore. So then that was the boarding schools was where we actually lost our language.
So then you're saying we got into the missionary to get educated because people were signing papers that they didn't understand. So then, do you guys know of any like big treaties that we had made with the colonists then?
So we had entered into a treaty, early treaty, 1722, with the British. And it was such the great treaty of the 5 nations and the Mohicans. But we had, in the discussion, the treaty discussion, we had 3 main things that we wanted. And that not being able to read played into it because one of the concerns we had was that the colonists were getting deeds to Indian land, but they didn't know that they were getting, you know, that they didn't understand that type of relationship that the colonists had with the land. You know, so I think we thought we were giving them permission to use the land. Yeah. And in their mind, they were like, no, you know, here's a legal deed to the land, sign off on it.
Now it's mine.
Yeah, now it's mine. And at the same time, they were taking bigger tracts of land than were actually on those deeds.
Exactly, because we didn't understand all of that stuff.
Because
I gotta say something first about our losing our numbers. We were never more than 400 people from the time we left Massachusetts till we got here.
Yeah.
Right now they're saying we're losing our people, we're losing our numbers.
But that relationship, you know, honestly, you cannot own the land. You know, you can be a part of the land, and you're only going to be here for a short time. You know, that ownership of land is it's made up. It doesn't exist. The pants I'm wearing now, I don't own them. I'm not going to have them for the rest of my life. They, you know, people get hand-me-downs all the time. Cars, you don't own cars. You know, I'm driving used vehicles. Somebody else took care of them before I did. So that whole ownership, you know, in our mindset, you use it for a time. You know, and we thought of it, well, they need a place to stay. We'll allow them to stay here for a time. But we always thought that they wouldn't be here forever. You know, but we belong to the land. They didn't belong to the land. You know, we belong to the land, so we knew we thought that we would always be in our territory there.
My favorite 2 words against all of this is greed and we share. That's a whole difference.
Yeah.
You know.
Even the language when they're talking during that treaty, the interpretation of the relationships was so different, or the perception of it too. You know, that English thought, oh, we're looking over them.
Yeah.
But we didn't see it as that. We saw it as a friendship. You know, and we had talked about that during that treaty You know, that this friendship that we have created, the chain of covenant is what they worded it. You know, it's supposed to be that friendship, look after each other. And our leader had told their governor, Barnett, I believe his name was, that we expect for that relationship to continue, and that if any of our people are being held captive, then they need to be released, because we're brothers, we're supposed to be friends.
Even that relationship, like you hear in movies all the time, the Great White Father. So on their end, the father is this power figure who controls their kids. On our end, the father is the one who provides and takes care of. So we understood that power balance changed and switched, and we seen the sway they had over all the tribes. So by calling them father, we expected them to take care of us and look out for us and somewhat provide for us, you know, because we're sharing our land with them.
Mm.
So that like with other tribes, we would call them brother or younger brother, uncle, different, depending on our relationship with that tribe and how we treated each other and how we related to each other. So there was a big misunderstanding there, and it just was with that language altogether. So then with treaties too, we could negotiate treaties, but whatever they put on paper and we couldn't read was whatever they wanted to put on paper, you know? And we might have had one thought process on what was being put on paper and wasn't really being put on paper, you know? And we did have really good relationships with some of those people who were writing, and there was, you know, they would tell us what was being written, but there was still that misunderstanding there too. And they might have withheld a lot of information too that would negatively affect us.
Yeah, when your worldview is so different, you know, it's hard to have a conversation, come to agreement, or even understand what the other person thinks is going on. You know, because your worldview is so much different than theirs.
And where were the women when all this was going on? Did you have to go home and ask her what she should
There
say?
were a lot of deeds that have
yeah.
women's names on them, remember? We learned that from Shirley Dunn, from her research.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure our men talk to the women, definitely. But their women, I'm sure, wasn't a part of that decision making.
Right.
So then, do you think after, or like during and after the missionaries, did like the gender relations change between like men and women?
I think so.
I think
Definitely.
I think the boarding school era had the largest effect on that, because you're now raised by them, and your thought process and your worldview is changing to what is raising you. So I think that had a large, but you still look around, and our women in this community still hold a lot of power. So I think that's a part of our spirit. But what is learned and what is given as, you know, your innate knowledge, I think there's a battle within each of us there, because after boarding schools, you know, we're matrilineal, but men are taught different now, and you're supposed to be like this. You know, man's supposed to provide, and you look at men are now planting gardens and doing what they call husbandry. Before that, you know, that was what the women did. You know, the women, you brought a deer home, the women took over, cut it up, and took care of the meat and all that. They took care of the gardens, the fields, everything, you know, and that changed with over time too. But the boarding school era, which you don't hear a lot on our end because we didn't have a problem speaking English there, you know. It wasn't this abrupt, you know, where we would go in and getting our children getting beaten and all these major punishments. I mean, they still happen.
We didn't have
But-
a lot of boarding schools either that I heard.
No.
But it wasn't so abrupt to us because we could speak English. We could understand what they expected of us, and we already had that long relationship with the mission, you know.
Yeah, you look at Ahmad.
Mm-hmm.
He could speak in English
Mm-hmm.
elegantly, even when he was a young man.
Yeah.
You know, that's what made him such a great diplomat. Is he spoke multiple languages,
Mm-hmm.
English being one of them. So, and he also may be the first Native American to ever write. You know, some of the oldest writings are definitely his. I don't know if there's anyone before him that was writing, but he was that well versed in English that he could also write in it.
So
Yeah, and even in that area, excuse me, even in that area of Opperman, I've read about his wife and some of the other wives of the leaders during that period. They were doing certain things to further Christianity among other tribes. They had felt that was their role, so they did have a role. But at the same time, when the men were losing this hunting thing, the women saw that change in them, and so they kind of changed into the way the white women were acting. So I've read about Catherine especially, but there were some other names too.
Yeah, you look at how much the culture of our men had changed. You know, we were hunters, fishermen, warriors.
Providers, you know.
You start taking all those things away, and you know, it's a sad part of our history, but there's truth to it that there was a long era of what you could coin, or what has been coined, the drunken Indian. You know, and what that is our men didn't have anything anymore. You know, the things that we lived for, we didn't have those things no more. You know, we couldn't go out and hunt like we used to. We couldn't go fish, and you know, we were warriors. We didn't have that no more. So our whole dichotomy of who we were as Native men, Mohican men, was gone. You know, I think that had such a large impact on why a lot of us were struggling with alcoholism so early.
Is that true? Is it gone?
It's coming back.
Yeah, the alcoholism is just so hurtful and continues to be hurtful. But thanks to the
Dutch. It was the Dutch
wasn't it
traders.
Wasn't it Henry Hudson who? Well, that's the first written episode then of introducing our people to rum.
Yeah, bringing barrels of rum.
And our genes aren't made to handle it.
And they understood that, and they used it over
Sure.
and over.
Yeah, to go back to that old treaty, the 1722 treaty, that was our third concern. Our leader said, you know, we're missing out on some of the essential things that we need as a people because our men go to the forts to go trade, and instead of giving them what they need, you guys entice them to trade it for rum. So then they're coming back and they don't have anything. And our leader had requested that they quit supplying our people with rum. He actually said to shut down the taps.
I remember that. Yeah, that statement. Yeah.
So then, besides what you guys have said about the move from East to Wisconsin, do you know anything else about like where else we've moved along that way, or like when and where other bands of us have moved? Like, I know there's some, like, in Oklahoma and some that are in Canada. Do you guys know how that happened?
So some ended up in Kansas.
Mm.
There was actually, I believe there was a reservation there in Kansas, at least some land set aside.
I think there still is. I think there's still, you can find them in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and Oklahoma. So Kansas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Some of our people had went to Canada and joined the Akwesasne Mohawk.
Was that after the Revolutionary War when that happened?
Yeah, after the Revolutionary War, a group of us had gone to Akwesasne territory and joined them. And they had said, you could join us, but you don't get to be Mohican anymore. You don't get a claim to be Mohican, but we'll give you your clan. So the Snipe clan amongst the Mohawks are the descendants of the Mohicans.
Okay.
Then a group of us joined with the Six Nations, and kind of the same thing. You know, you're the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. You can join us, and I don't know whether it was a large group or not, or maybe a family or two. I'm not sure. But so there was a group of Mohicans there as well.
And you do read later, when we came to Wisconsin, there was some Munsee people who had come from Canada to live with us, but then they went back to Canada. And then even names, the names of the families are even.
Yeah, the Jacobs
given.
was one of them.
Yeah, Jacobs was one of them, yeah. But from between us leaving Stockbridge, when we first left New Stockbridge in New York, a small group went to Ohio first. I think that was led by Metoxen, wasn't it?
Mm.
And when they got there, the land wasn't available anymore. I don't think there were any places in between, were there, between New Stockbridge and Ohio?
Ohio, White River, Indiana, Kaukauna for a minute.
Yeah, that was after we left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after we left Indiana, so from dispersing from Indiana is where some people went to Kansas and Oklahoma.
Right.
And then we came up to Kaukauna.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually got the treaty with the Menomonies and Ho-Chunks for Lake Winnebago, the reservation we had over by Lake Winnebago. Until
And that's when the citizens of Indians split. That's
Oh,
where
yeah.
it is.
Have you heard about that?
I have, but I don't remember much about it.
Well, there was a dispute between certain people of the tribe who wanted to become citizens and others who wanted to retain being Indians, it was called back home. And that lasted for quite a few years.
So that would come from the government too, because they offered citizenship, and that was another way to take care of the Indian problem. So if you became a citizen, you got your own land, and you could provide for yourself, make your own money and stuff. But taxes and everything else that come along with being a citizen wasn't recognized, and that goes back to this long relationship with a mission, and slowly their ways creeping in, losing our ways. So the Indian Party would have been more traditional thinking, where the Citizen Party would want more of their ways. And the Indian Party wanted to hold the land as one, and keep everything together, more of a traditional way.
Yeah.
Yeah, the offer from the government was, we're going to offer you American citizenship in exchange for land that you can farm and X amount of dollars to get equipment and maintain or create your farm.
Which is kind of a prerequisite to allotments.
It's probably sounded pretty good back then to them,
Yeah.
especially if they were
If they were struggling and,
very poor, yeah.
but, you know, that would have resulted in, the government was interested in just getting rid of us. You know, and then we would give up our status as Indian and we'd be just American citizens.
They no longer have to honor our treaties.
Yeah, thanks to Carl Miller, who was negotiating the treaty here, you know, for this reservation. Who knows what would have happened?
We went in the treaty with the Menominees for this land. Because at that point too, they were trying to send us to Minnesota when they wanted all the natives on the western side of the Mississippi. So they sent some people over there, probably knowing that they didn't want to do it.
Yeah, there was at least a small group of our people in Minnesota during that period of time,
And then they came back and reported that the land was no good and they didn't want it. And I think that probably goes back to our diplomatic relationship with the U.S. government, because they relied on us a bunch too back in the pre-Revolutionary War stuff. And even after that, you know, there's a story of them sending, I don't remember which leader it was, but when Tecumseh was gathering people.
Probably our fifth great grandfather.
Yeah, they sent him in to talk to Tecumseh when he was gathering, and he spent several nights with him talking, and came out there, and there was no official anything written down what come of it, but soon after that, Tecumseh decided against, you know, continuing with what he was doing, gathering the tribes. But that relationship must have held some weight yet for us to be able to say, no, we don't want to go to Minnesota, you know, and them not forcing us to Minnesota, because the way it was working and the way it was going, I'm sure they could have forced us to Minnesota, but then treatying with the Menominees for the land, that the Menominees had convinced the government was no good to anybody, you know. That's why the Menominees could stay where they were, because they convinced them that the land was not good for farming, and convinced all the whites around them that they didn't want the land.
Yeah,
That's why they gave us Red Springs.
You could be a Viking
Good
now.
for nothing.
yeah, their relationship with us, I think because we were so good at being diplomats, you know, after hundreds of years, we weren't necessarily going to
Right.
just allow them to push us around after a certain point. You know, we knew how to kind of finesse what was going on,
And our leaders could read and write.
yeah. I mean, Carl Miller it wasn't a known thing at the time that he was coming from our old reservation in Stockbridge, Wisconsin, by Lake Winnebago. It wasn't widely known within our tribe that him and, I forget the other one who was with him, but we're negotiating this treaty until it was already set, because he had gone back down to,
You think you're confusing him with somebody.
I do too. I don't think it's,
Carl wasn't until 1930s.
oh, there's an older Carl, right?
no.
No?
Austin Quinney
Austin Quinney, okay,
was
yeah.
one
he
of
was-
the leaders, and the other one was John Matoxin, wasn't it?
Yeah, John Matoxin was one of them. I swear there was a Miller in there, but maybe I'm,
That's for up here. When we moved up and got this reservation right here, that's when
Yeah, he was instrumental in
Then-
that.
it was Carl Miller.
oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about, this reservation here.
Yeah, right here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but people didn't know that, because that's when the Citizen and Indian Party were at conflict.
We were in conflict for so many years. Yeah.
And then he had,
When I first started into politics back in the 80s, you could still feel that citizen of India division.
oh, I think it's still present
I
today.
do
It's-
too.
I don't feel it so much anymore, but if you do, I believe you.
I believe it.
I mean, you could see, even historically, the family that, one of the families that were part of the Citizen Party that came up, and one of our leaders had talked that individual to come up here, and he was part of the Citizen Party, but he had convinced him, hey, you know, come up. So he did. I don't want to get too much into family politics, but I think the remnants of it are still there, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
Go to a council meeting.
Yeah, but when they were negotiating a treaty here, it wasn't widely known that they were doing it. And when they did, they went back down to Stockbridge in Wisconsin and said, all right, anybody who wants to remain in India, we have some new land. We just negotiated with the Menominees, now move up, you know, this is our new home. And a lot of those,
1856. It's a treaty.
And someone stayed, right?
And then they gave us 2 townships and took half of it away from us. Sold it to the Menominees. No, sold it to the loggers. That man's name is still a big name in Shawnee.
yeah, our treaty was for 44,000 acres. We have half of that now, so.
Yeah, got it here, I think.
And that's where allotments took effect.
Decentralize, an attempt at decentralizing our community by putting white families in between us. And that also was the birth of blood quantum. So the 1/4 blood quantum, that requirement came from the Dawes Act.
And I found a letter where they're discussing this. They wanted it to say Indian, and they wanted it to say Stockbridge, and you know, there's 3 choices
So I walk in.
that they started out with. So I say we can count all your. I still believe that anyway. You should be able to count all your Indian blood.
Agree.
You know, I just don't see why.
Yeah, because there's so many people out there that are part of all these different tribes.
Exactly.
But they don't
And they're a quarter Indian,
And
and they can't.
traditionally-
Yeah.
We would been that way, we'd have been mixed. Because, like was said earlier, if you don't do that, then pretty soon you're marrying your cousins and
Well, they claim Akma was half Mohawk. That he was Akwesasne Mohawk. So,
They were marrying out all, you know.
Yeah.
and Little Turtle, the great military leader
Yeah.
from the Miami, he was half Mohican. So it's just, yeah, it was traditional for us to marry
And that,
inside.
that too, like, if he was half Mohawk, that would have been a thing we did too. So if we were warring with a tribe and we had a treaty with them to stop the war, we would have sent young men or young women to them too, or our leaders would have intermarried there too, to strengthen that bond there.
Yeah, he would act as a diplomat sometimes for the Mohawks at times, because he could speak Mohawk as well. So to get that family connection, and he would sometimes act as a diplomat for the Mohawks. You know, at that time, then we were not physically at war with each other, but
And we cared about each other, and we were willing to help each other.
yeah, the Allotment Act introduced blood quantum. They needed to figure out what is the surplus Indian land that we can divvy up. How much of this land can we divvy up to sell off to to white people. And in order to do that, we need to figure out who are actual members of this tribe that we could create a roll of
Yeah.
tribal members so that we could say, all right, they have 400 members, they only need X amount of land. All the rest we're going to sell off.
And that's when the land, so they would give, I don't remember what it was at that time, 40 or 80 acres
Yeah.
to only the head of each household. And if it was a male that was 18 or older and didn't have a household, then he might get some land. But that was short-sighted too, because after they have
Hey, are you still
how many
there?
generations down,
I want some
where
of
is
that
their land going to be? That's why land keeps getting further and further down.
rubber, where is it?
Now, when you go for land, the most you can get is 5 acres.
Yeah,
If
rubber.
that.
When I first started into politics back in the 80s, you could still feel that citizen and Indian division.
Oh, I think it's still present
I
today.
do too.
I don't feel it so much anymore, but if you do, I believe you.
I believe it.
I mean, you could see, even historically, the family that, one of the families that were part of the Citizen Party that came up, and one of our leaders had talked that individual to come up here, and he was part of the Citizen Party, but he had convinced him, hey, come up. So he did. I don't want to get too much into family politics, but I think the remnants of it are still there,
Yeah. Yeah.
Go to the council meeting.
Yeah, but when they were negotiating the treaty here, it wasn't widely known that they were doing it. And when they did, they went back down to Stockbridge in Wisconsin and said, all right, anybody who wants to remain an Indian, we have some new land. We just negotiated with the Menominees, now move up. This is our new home. And a lot of those,
1856. It's a treaty.
And some of them stayed, right?
yeah.
And then they gave us 2 townships and took half of it away from us. Sold it to the Menominees. No, sold it to loggers. That man's name is still a big name in Shawano.
Yeah, our treaty was for 44,000 acres. We have half of that now, so.
Yeah, got it here, I think.
And that's where allotments took effect, because anything that wasn't allotted off to us was sold off. Sold off to like that. That's logging,
She wants
the
to take a
timbers.
picture of it.
You won't find it.
All the allotment.
Yeah, lotted up the land, created the checkerboarded lands.
And that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, so allotment, 1887, the Dawes Act or General Allotment Act, was meant to divvy up what they called surplus Indian land. They were like, oh, we gave these Indians all this land, but there's only X amount of them. They don't need all that land. So the Dawes Act put in place the separation or the breaking up our land base.
There were a lot of congressional acts dealing with the tribal split, and there was a period of time where our tribe was basically terminated. So there was the Indian Reorganization Act in 1934 that allowed tribes to reorganize, to obtain some land, and to govern themselves again. So that's when Carl Miller, who Travis spoke of earlier, that's when he was instrumental in getting the tribe under that act. And that's what set up our current constitution of 1937, where we have tribal government of a president, a vice president, a treasurer, and 4 council people. And that still exists to this day, has not changed since 1947. And there's pros and cons associated with that, of course, if anybody wants to talk about that.
I think the con to it, I think there's definitely some good things that came out of the Indian Reorganization Act, because I think for the most part it was, they call that era of Indian law the self-determination era. So the federal government were trying to give us some more, trying to give us some of our authority back to govern ourselves. But I think the downfall on the IRA constitutions is that they're cookie cutter. They all look the same. And there's a provision in all the IRA constitutions that gives the Secretary of the Interior X amount of authority. If we ever wanted to change our constitution, implement new laws, we had to get permission or authorization from the Secretary of Interior. So I think that immediately decrease our ability to really be sovereign or exercise sovereignty. When you think about the word sovereignty, it means the authority to govern yourselves as a people, and that includes your government, your governmental body, your community, people not your population that isn't part of the government, but your group as a whole, and as well as your economy. But really, it created, we've been in a quasi-sovereign status for a long time because of agreements we entered into, and that the IRA, I think, really just expanded on that quasi-sovereignty. And as part of the Indian Reorganization Act, too, is where you start seeing that concept of trust responsibility to Indian tribes. And that trust responsibility, I think, has saved us in certain situations. We rely on that relationship at times. Like we go in front of the Supreme Court, or we have disputes. There's been important federal Indian case law that went in a positive direction for the Indians based on making that argument. But it definitely, I think, strengthened that quasi-sovereign status and diminished our sovereignty.
I think one of the big things during that era, when it was almost an era where you had to be recognized as being a native tribe, and in order to do that, you had to you govern in your constitution. Your government had to look like the U.S. government. So that was one of the big things. So that pretty much got rid of any tribe who wanted to have a traditional government. So now you had presidents or chiefs and councils, and that opened it up to what we have a lot now in a lot of the tribes is those kind of power hungry, kind of more assimilated leaders or lack of leaders going for that power, and I think that's had a very negative effect on tribes. But overall, I think the IRA was a good thing because the direction stuff was headed. More and more power was taken from us. We were pretty much wards of the U.S. government. They said every move we could make, you know, you look at the tribes in the plains, how bad it was for them. You know, our tribe probably would have fared a little bit better because, you know, of our history with the government, but still, I mean, they empowered us to do things like that we're doing now, buying back land. You know, I don't think without the IRA we'd be able to do that right now, buy back land that we lost. Allowed us, it kind of opened the way for casinos, things like that.
I think our people knew how to assimilate better too, Jim. Some of the people in the western tribes groups around the reservation lost their complete way of life. They were out.
I think there was an assimilation aspect to it, especially with the government structures. I think that was kind of one of the big negatives. It allowed us to assimilate even more. But now, it's like a turning point now where we're kind of in a position where we can kind of work it, and it's allowing us with casinos and everything else, and more ability to provide for ourselves. Now we're in a process where we can de-assimilate.
The act of what was I looking for? Anyway, when it comes to sovereignty, I learned that the best way to be sovereign is to exercise that sovereignty in every way that you can. And for example, a few years back, somebody up here was given a ticket about their dog under a Shawano County ordinance. And Shawano County ordinances have no effect on this reservation. So, but this person came to me about it, and I went to the tribal president at the time, I think it was Wally, and told him about it, because other council members were, so we'll just pay and never, don't worry about it. And I was really upset. I said, that's an infringement on our sovereignty, and if he goes ahead and pays it, then that's just saying that we don't have any sovereignty. So Wally did take care of it with whoever our tribal police officer was at the time. That's just one example of exercising your sovereignty when you can. And another thing is all these contracts that we have. Some people say, oh, we said that we would give up our sovereignty in that contract for business purposes. Well, if you're agreeing to do that, that's your sovereign decision to do that. Even though you're giving it up, that's your decision to do that.
Yeah, I've heard the argument made that giving up your sovereignty is an exercise of sovereignty, which
It's crazy.
I find it to be a ridiculous. I mean, that's like saying, I'm giving up my freedom and allow myself to be imprisoned.
Yeah.
Exercising my freedom to make that decision to give up my freedom and be in prison the rest of my life.
Right.
To me, that's they're very much the same kind of concept, but I don't like those limited waivers of immunity and sovereignty when we're entering into contracts, because, like you said, we should be exercising our sovereignty to the max. There shouldn't be this boundary of what we can and can't do. We're a sovereign nation. We should just be doing it. That's my opinion. I think we should just be doing it. And I think even if things go the legal route, things that end up in federal court. So be it. Everything is sovereign. Everything is a part of sovereignty. Like I said, your community, your citizens, looking over your citizens, passing laws, ordinances, whatever it is. Look over your citizens, your government, your economy. What else is there really? you know, your people, looking after your people, everything falls under that. You know, health and welfare, your cultural and tribal identity fall under that. You know, if you look at that concept of sovereignty, there's really nothing outside of those bounds that I think should stop us from exercising that, entering into agreements where we're not waiving our sovereignty.
Is it sovereign to say you gotta stay at work, or you can't do this, and you can't, you know, there's so many issues happening. We can't do that. They said we can't do that. Who has the authority for the sovereign rules? You know, that's a big thing of people complain. I don't work there no more, so I don't know. But there's big issues about it, so.
You're talking about tribal rules? Tribal work rules?
Work rules, yeah.
I think that that would fall under ultimately the council, which would, I think, would be like the greatest form of sovereignty if we went back to our traditional government. If we actually decided to, as a people, to, you know, rewrite our constitution to where our form of government was changed. I think that would be the ultimate act of sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But then you have to go through the BIA to do that still?
See, we only, because we have it in our constitution, that we have to go through the Secretary of the Interior, who is the head of, so the Secretary of the Interior is head of the Department of Interior, which oversees the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So that's how that chain goes. But we could amend our constitution to cut that clause out, and then we don't have to no more. And there's been debate, people have debated, well, then you have to ask the secretary to take it out.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been plenty of tribes that said, no, we don't have to ask the secretary to take it out, we're gonna amend our constitution, cut that out. And for the most part, you know, legally it looks like you don't have to. Unless you're gonna ask them, and then you're giving them the authority to make that determination of what's in your constitution, but
I don't know if you've heard anything about what goes on, and people get a job and they'll work maybe 2 weeks and they quit because they get what do you say the word? I don't know. But they can't breathe. They can't come to work 2 minutes late. You know, all that kind of stuff is not Indian, and I tell them that all the time. That's not the way Indian people are. You gotta go home because something happened? Go. You ain't, you know, you're not, and you're doing your job and you complete your job. I mean, you've got no complaints about what you've done. It's just that you weren't there and I can't watch you. That's the way I feel about it anyway. And I tell them all the time, that's not the Indian way.
Are you familiar with the Ho-Chunk Constitution? No. Haven't they gotten rid of the secretary?
I think they did.
And Oneida did too.
Oneida did. Menominee were in the process of doing it when Glenn Miller was
Oh, they
president,
liked them?
but then he had passed and it never
Yeah.
ended up going through. They had to had a special election to replace him, but a lot of tribes have done it, so I wish all tribes would do it.
Yeah. Well, our tribe is in the process right now of a constitutional revision again. And have you all replied to the survey? And,
I didn't even see it.
the top two issues that the people want to see according to the survey is membership and eliminating the secretary, which I was really happy to see. But that'll be quite a process. I think there's going to be another survey going out now based on the results of that survey.
Yeah, then they have to hold secretarial election, and it's a little bit of a process. But
Yes. And this is like the third or fourth time that we've tried to revise the Constitution. So it's not easy to do it. with the people. But one thing that did happen, since I was on the Constitution Committee back in the 90s, now when they vote to change the Constitution, the only people who can vote on it are the people who live within the confines of the reservation.
Is it the ones that are affected?
Yeah, yeah. Previously, all tribal members could vote, but now it's just the people on the.
So you bring in all your cousins that don't live here and have them vote the way you want them to.
They have to live here. That's the rule.
I'm just telling them how it works now. You bring in all your cousins that don't live here. If it's something for you.
Yeah, so like Joe was saying, I think we're starting to take some of those things and really knowing how to manipulate them to benefit us in a way that we're more successful. We had those so many generations that were subjected to blatant acts of assimilation. But that era is, although we could say we're continuously assimilating, right? Technology is advancing so quick, but I think those generations who have experienced assimilation at its highest peak, I think those traumas are starting to subside over time. If you look back, we didn't really use our language to name places here. We had Muh-he-con-ne-ok Road, but that was it for the longest time. Then we started naming our other little settlements, if you want to call them that, Towuk Circle. We started using our tribal language to name places. And I think it's because that trauma has started to subside. And yeah, this is our place. This is our home. We've been here for now, since 1856. And there's no living memories of that trauma anymore, of relocating.
Right, we've been here for longer than we have in any other amusement place, yeah.
And I think that's where,
Which one is that?
you asked about revitalization.
Which one is that?
The language is such a big part of that. And even just naming, using our language to create place names here on the reservation is also how would you word it? An act of self-determination, an act of cultural revitalization. We're doing that now, here. And so many of our elders too that were subjected to the mission schools. There can be quite the contrast between those elders that spent a lot of time at the mission schools, and a lot of them now that spent a lot of time there aren't necessarily here anymore.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of them have
All
passed.
are gone, yeah. That's true.
So we're this younger generation is definitely searching for that identity again, rebuilding that identity.
Yeah, we don't have to look at just being good little Indians anymore. Like they want us to be.
Yeah.
To be what we can identify ourselves. I really appreciate that and seeing that in younger people. I appreciate it so much. When we first started talking about language and tradition here, maybe in the 1970s, like most tribes were doing that same thing in the 1970s. I know some of my personal friends who, well, what are they talking about, being traditional? And we still have some people that talk like that today. That it was upsetting, but the people who wanted to see it did it anyway. They moved forward with it, and so I can see the change already. People who were bashing it back in the day are agreeing with it now. It took that long to.
And that's another issue that I tell people. Don't you think Indian? you don't agree with that, think about it. Why are you thinking different? Because you don't think Indian. I mean, you know, don't be ashamed of thinking different.
Yeah, you look at the civil rights era, that had such a huge impact on Indian country because out of the civil rights era came the Red Power movement. You know, and you had AIM and all these other groups like that, and they were screaming, "No, we are Indian. We're proud to be Indian," and they were all over the TV. You know, that was the most publicity or media or whatever you want to call it that Native people were getting for a very long time. You know, probably since the Indian Wars. You know, and we were all over the TV, and Russell Means was on the cover of Time magazine. You know, for his activism. And what came out of that was you start seeing powwows pop up. You know, like traditionally we can't have powwows, but I think we've seen that as a part of, you know, reclaiming our identity, celebrating our existence and our culture. And
Even you look around today and listening to us talk about different eras, using the words native or Indian, you hear talking about this era, you hear Indian a lot. Now you look at today, this day and age, how often do you hear that word opposed to native? You know, that's when you look back, that kind of all stems from the IRA and how it moves forward.
Yeah, and even like at least where I'm at in like higher education is people are starting to claim indigenous more than native because we're not Native American. We were indigenous. We were here before America was even a thought.
And you're a prime example. You're a young indigenous woman
What time is it?
in a very big university, and you're studying indigenous studies. I mean, when I grew up, and I still struggle with that, being that, thinking I'm just a dumb Indian. And I'm not even directly affected by those traumas, you know, it's just
But it
that.
still travels through.
Yeah. But each generation's getting smarter and taking more advantage of those, like, college, higher education, and at the same time, their traditional lifestyles, and blending them together and making our people stronger. And it's a process. This whole process since contact, you know, it's not, nothing happened, you know, in a short period of time. It all took time, you know, generations of change, and we've been being assimilated since. When did we take on the mission? What year was that? 17
something.
30 something.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, 100-some years of that before we lost our language. Over 100 years, you know. And we got young people in the tribe who are bringing it back way quicker than we thought it would be.
Yep,
I
they
guess
sure are.
awesome too, their language, I just love it.
it's just a slang term that everybody uses.
Right, exactly.
You know, like white kids from Bowler thought, you know, your head was your Kanogin, but or like little things like that. I started realizing, I was like, oh, these are just, you know, these certain words have lasted throughout the generations.
Yeah,
Yep.
my dad named Elena Sapute. What does that mean? Oh, loosely, it just means little stinker. Very loosely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now we have, you know, revitalization of the language. The big house being here is a testament, you know, to the regrowth of our culture and reclaiming our identity.
And haven't like in the past we've given some stuff to different tribes, like the Ojibways and stuff, and like now they're giving it back to us, or like we're relearning it from them.
Yeah, so we'd given some of our songs to the Oneida Big House. Because the son of our last Big House leader was sick, and his oldest son said, you know, there's too many. He's like, now there's not enough people that are willing to participate. Everybody is, or lots of people are Christian, and we don't have enough people to keep this going, but we don't want it to disappear. So they had given a handful of our songs to the Oneidas to hold on to. And he told the Oneidas one day, he's like, my people will come back and ask for these songs again, and then I want you to give them to them.
There were some other ones like that. Somebody's out east has kept the language of maybe the Oneidas, I'm not sure, you know, but I've heard that story too. When they kept them for them. When they were leaving, they said, keep our stories. I mean, keep our songs, whatever. So